of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In a moment of silence for the all-American men and women in service of our country, our firefighters and police officers who have passed since our last meeting.
Let's take a moment to remember the 8 police officers and 4 firefighters that passed since the last board meeting.
Thank you. Chief Mazulis, you want to introduce our new employee?
As a point of order, did you want to complete the roll call?
Thank you. Yes. Okay, yes. New this month, we will start doing a roll call for the purposes of making sure that anyone calling in can understand who's speaking. So Scott, if you don't mind introducing yourself, and then Corey, and we'll just go down the row.
Scott Springett.
Corey Cooperman.
Helen McNeil.
Diana Christensen.
Lance Waldrop.
Okay.
All right. As we have discussed over the months, we have been working to fill some help in the shop, and that fine young man is here today. This is Reese Tarver. Graduated from Camp Verde High School, and he's got an associate's in automotive sciences. And we're super happy to have him on the team. Little sketch about having another Tarver in the mix, but we'll make do. And he'd shake hands, but they're greasy because he's been helping Mike do a great job today. So, but welcome. You have anything you'd like to say? You don't have to. It's just putting you on the spot.
I'd just like to say that I appreciate getting the opportunity to work with you. It's a wonderful opportunity, and can't wait to see what it brings.
Well, Reese, thank you and welcome. We're glad you're here. And yes, we're glad there's another Tarver in the family, in our the SFD family, but so welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Chief, do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
We do not.
Okay. All right, so then let's proceed to the consent agenda. There are 2 items on the consent agenda: the December 17, 2024 regular and executive session meeting minutes, and the December 18th special joint meeting with City Council minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda for December.
Second? Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Mr. Boldra.
All right. Well, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. You guys have the December financial report in the packet. We have the slides open up, right?
Yep.
Perfect. So starting off, tax levy revenue for the month, we brought in 2.4 million in total tax levy revenue. That was 98,000 over what we had budgeted for the month of December. Really, I know we've got some new board members, and so just kind of discuss how we kind of set the budget surrounding property tax collection, because typically we see 2 large collections during the year. We see our first half taxes, which usually hits October, November, and then second half taxes in that March, April time period. But what we look at for purposes of what we expect to collect each month is we take a 3-year average of what we've collected as a percentage of our total budget month over month. And we use that 3-year average to come up with what our anticipated collections are for each month into the new year. And so when we see, so we'll always see types of variances, things like, the treasurer's office didn't get bills out as quickly as they did the prior year, and people pay a little later. Or what we saw this past year is one of the large insurance company or mortgage companies typically pays on October 31st. And this year they paid on November 1st. And so we saw kind of across the state, these big variances. We don't get too worried about it until we're, really this point. And if, December, January, and if we're still seeing a big shortfall from our first half tax collection, then we tend to reach out to the county, see if they've got any kind of inclination on what's driving those variances. Moving on to non-levy revenue. We're at 490,845 for the month. We are over budget by 222,000. And a couple things driving that. One, we did receive our Prop 207 money in December. That's the marijuana tax that we get. That was $113,000 that we collected. In addition, we have continued to perform well with ambulance collections. That's making up $42,000 of the overage. And then the other big item is our ambulance revenue. Ambulance revenue, I'm sorry, I already said that, interest earnings. We have budgeted fairly conservative on our interest earnings, again, with some anticipation that the Fed was going to be cutting interest rates last year and into this year. But we're still continuing to kind of outperform that estimate. Moving on to expenses, starting off personnel costs, we're at $1,338,000 or under budget by $20,800. On the expenses side, kind of how I mentioned how we do our budgeting for our revenue, our expenses a little different because we don't always know when everything's going to occur. And so for the majority of our expenses, we just take a 12-month, take the annual budget and divide it by 12, with the exception of personnel. Personnel is one of those items. It's a very large expense, and 3 pay period months can really throw those numbers off. So we do budget our personnel by pay period. And then other large things like dispatch, our commercial insurance and like workers' comp, which are large payments that we make quarterly. We budget those for the quarters in which the payments are anticipated to be paid. But everything else for the most part is divided by 12 and kind of look at a run rate. So kind of continuing on, buildings and land was at $40,996. We did have an overage of about $3,000 for the month, mainly driven by utility costs. However, when you get to year to date, you'll see we're actually under budget in buildings and land. Vehicles and equipment as well has a small variance for the month of about $3,300. Again, driven by timing on EMS supplies. When we get to year to date as well, there we're doing really good on those expenditures. Communication IT under budget by $19,700, and managerial expense pretty much right in line with budget there at $95,732. In totality for the month, our total expenses were $1.6 million, but we're under budget by $33,000 in totality. Looking at year to date, total revenue year to date is at $16.3 million. We are over budget by $940,000. Property tax collection, again, small variance of $23,000 year to date on $13 million as a percentage, not a big variance that we're concerned about. But non-levy revenue is strong at $2.7 million, or making up the majority of that overage on non-levy revenue. And that's being driven really by 3 main categories of revenue: our ambulance collection, our wildland deployment, and our investment earnings. As far as expenses, total expenses are $11.36 million. We are under budget by $345,000 through the first 6 months of the year. So good trending on revenue and expenses for the first half of the fiscal year. As far as percentage, we're 50% of the budget with 50% remaining. Breakdown, personnel costs are highest at 85%, followed by operations at 7% of our total expenses, managerially at 4%, and communication also at 4%. One kind of important thing with this slide here is, with personnel costs being our highest, our biggest dollar amount, it's also the highest percentage of our budget. We tend to want to watch that. When we start exceeding 90% of our total expenses going to personnel, that's where we tend to see districts get themselves a little bit of financial trouble, because again, a small percentage increase in a personnel cost can have a big impact on that budget, and there's not enough dollars or resources available for other aspects of funding within the organization. And so we always include this slide with all of our board reports because we just think it's something I'm mindful the board should be aware of. I will get the caveat that when we start the fiscal year, that's typically in wildland season. So we could have a July where there's a lot of deployments. We have very heavy personnel costs. Nobody spent any money anywhere else on any other programs. And so we may see those numbers shift, but definitely something, we want our boards to be aware of and watch for.
And Gabe, given that we have 85%, is that a comfortable allotment?
Yeah. Again, looking at where we're at, of that budget variance of 345,000, over half of it is in our other expenditures. So a lot of it is what's kind of skewing the number a little bit is because we're not spending in other areas. Well, we budgeted more, we've not incurred the cost. So in reality, our personnel costs are a lower percentage of our total budget. It's just where the dollars are actually going right now.
Thank you.
And last slide, we ended the month with 43.7 million total cash on hand. That's an increase of about 3.9 million year over year. Other assets decreased slightly from 25.2 to 23.5. Some of that's a function of our annual depreciation. Others was accounting adjustments for ambulance receivables and lease receivables. And then finally, our liabilities, slight uptick 33.2 to 33.3 million. And I know we've got on the agenda to discuss what the lion's share of that 33 million in liabilities is related to. Unless there's any questions, that's my report for December.
Are you going to talk about the PSPRS?
Yes, I will. Or are we just going to go into that right now?
Yes.
Priorities. Okay. As the old board and new board may or may not be aware, our firefighters participate in what's called the Public Safety Retirement System. And that system is kind of split into multiple facets. There is our older employees, which fall in tier 1, tier 2.
More tenured.
Maybe older too. The older guys.
Keep going, buddy.
So it's essentially a siloed pension fund within a larger pension fund. So we're graded on our own experiences from an actuarial standpoint. We're responsible for our own fund. We fund it, but we're segregated from the entire fund. Then we've got tier 3, which are less tenured employees. And that is now part of a pooled fund. And one of the issues that our pension system has had over the years is with certain organizations, early retirements, buying back time when a lot of these districts went from old volunteer or old rural metro contracted agencies. They bought back a lot of time for the employees, and it wasn't actually calculated necessarily at the right rates. And so that's created some unfunded liabilities. We also had kind of a history with the pension system and the way the money was managed was maybe a little bit more riskier than other pension systems were managed. And there was a significant amount of assets lost at that time, as well as just kind of some assumptions and things that they had for the actuarial that made it favorable from a cost perspective. But then when they started to realize that there's funding gaps created down the road and made changes, it's created larger unfunded liabilities. I would say over the last 10 years, when we got the actuarial, it was always this scary waiting game. There were years where we saw this organization alone saw $800,000 plus increases in pension costs year over year. The last couple of years, I'd say probably the last 4 or 5 years, it started to smooth out. There's a new administration at PSPRS, and they've really been doing a lot to kind of right side the ship. We still see more fluctuation than we see in other pension systems with other clients. But all in all, I am happy to say it does seem to be stabilizing and improving. So we did get our actuarial valuation for last year. It is kind of important to note that it's as of June 30th, 24. And it's going to impact our pension costs for fiscal year 25, 26. So none of this will go into actual effect until July 1. But a couple kind of key points here. The big one, our funded status, maintained relatively flat, actually increased slightly from 64.1% funded to 60.4% funded. The downside to that, and that's our tier 1 and tier 2. Our tier 3 employees, which are now in that pooled plan, went from 108.9 to 109.5% funded. So that plan is actually overfunded, has actually an asset, where our group is an unfunded, and we'll talk about in a minute. The other big thing is then what that does is that's what drives our contribution rate. Despite seeing a increase in our funded status, we actually saw also a correlating increase in our contribution rate at our tier 1 and our tier 2. And really what a lot of driving that is we had a kind of a larger number of retirees over the last year. And so now we have less people contributing to that group. And so that kind of drives kind of an uptick in that contribution rate. But when you look at it from an actuarially calculated contribution, we actually have now lower salary base contributing. So despite seeing an uptick in the contribution rate, it's actually projected to be a small downtick in contributions for tier 1 and tier 2. However, there's a legacy component to that is tacked on to our tier 3 employees. And so we will see a uptick on their pension costs because of that adjustment to kind of make up for what we're not contributing for the people that have retired out of the system.
What is the current percentage?
Our current percentage is 46.27. And we're going to 49.57. And then our tier 3 that are in the defined benefit are at 41.7, going to 45.2.
And that's a percentage just for our newer board members. If you could explain, that's a percentage of what?
Percentage of wages. So for every dollar of wages, we're now going to be spending about 45 cents in pension cost.
Wow.
The defined contribution plan, similar, meaning, so there's the defined benefit so tier 1 and tier 2 are all in a defined benefit plan, meaning they'll get an actual pension check. Tier 3 could either elect to be in a defined benefit plan or a defined contribution plan, which is more like your traditional 457 type plan. And those have, again, different rates, but they're all still fairly similar. Like the defined contribution plan, our rate went from 43.6 to 47.2. So they're all around the same rates with some small variances there.
And how does that compare to other fire districts?
In the state of Arizona, what a lot of them that have done since they've seen this kind of what a lot of them done with their pension unfunded liability is they refinance their pension debt, and so their contribution rates have greatly decreased. But what we've done is we've now kind of said, well, look over here. Our contribution rate's only 16, 17% now, but we've got a $30 million liability that we're making a debt payment on. And the reason they did that was there was some analysis done by Stiefel, who does a lot of fire district financing and stuff, and was able to basically save districts money on the delta between what PSPRS charges on the unfunded liability and what the prevailing interest rates were in the market at that same time. Sedona elected not to go forward with it. we had a handful of clients do it and the majority not. And, you know, probably the obvious reason being is we're taking a actuarially calculated assumed liability, which is a fancy way of saying a made up number. And we're pledging our assets and, you know, creating a real debt on that number. And so, you know, is the benefit of that interest rate savings of 4%, roughly was about what everybody saw, worth that shift in potential risk and burden. And so one of my big things was always, it would like to see before we start putting more money into our unfunded liability, one of the big things we've always done is, you know, as you saw in the report there, we do have a healthy cash balance. A lot of that is one for capital, one for just financial reserves. And some of it is we have been doing well and performing well over the years and kind of saving that money is to start seeing some stability in our pension. And then we can start paying that down with some of our surpluses and generate now savings that way by just paying down that liability over the years. But what I've never wanted a client to do is sit down and pay down 10 million of unfunded liability this year. And then next year it goes up 5 million because the actuarials made assumption changes and everything. And again, with the fluctuations we've seen, it's to me it's been a risky decision to make. And I've kind of left it up to the boards to make that decision, with the caveat that it's not mine to make. My position is it's risky. I think, again, if we can continue to see stability like we did this year, it'd be nice to start to pay that down and reduce that burden that we're paying now over the long term.
I'd say we're probably 15 years out from where we won't employ any tier one employees. So that liability will be for those that are all retired. And so I think that'll be a philosophical change as well. But again, it's a magic number.
Yeah. And to go back to that, so, you know, our unfunded liability, actually, you know, although our funding status increased, a lot of that was driven by the increase in the assets that were within the system. But we went from 26 million to 27.7 million in unfunded liability year over year. The previous year, which I actually pulled up real quick, we went down significantly. And that was because the investments had done so well. So if you could imagine, if we happen to see a downturn in the markets, we could then see that unfunded liability grow just because of that and nothing to do with anything that we've done.
But Gabe, one of the points that I think you made with the PSPRS board that I think is important around that is that the numbers they use on investments are over, I think it's 7 years.
They use a 7-year averaging.
Your average. So if things go up, you don't see it go up comparably. It's a 7-year average. And so, and that makes a difference.
Right. And one of the big things is on those earnings. It's where it goes back to the earnings assumptions. And that was one of the things kind of driving the growth in this massive growth in unfunded liabilities. They were using earnings assumptions for years that they weren't even, the underlying assets weren't even targeting. And so we saw over those few years where they started ratcheting down the earnings assumption, our unfunded liability increased drastically because we had to make out for all those earnings that never really occurred.
There are other questions, okay?
This may not quite make sense, but I have a question. Once tier 1 in 15 years is no longer with us and they're receiving, you know, their pension, we don't pay into then tier 3 anymore? Is that correct? But yet
No.
there's a liability.
We have that liability.
Yes.
So while that liability won't grow anymore, we'll still have the legacy liability that's attached onto our tier 3 contribution rates. Yeah. So the only way our tier 1 liability goes away is when our last tenured employee and or their beneficiary spouse is no longer with us. Like, yes, they're like dead.
Okay, I have a small request for the future. When we're doing the PSPR, I think, can we get a slide with the numbers on it?
Yeah, I'll put, just another little snapshot.
It would really help.
Okay.
And I know it helped a lot with the PSPRS board.
Okay.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So while we're on that, you have the budget schedule.
Yes. Do we the schedule? Okay, do you guys have the schedule in your packet?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, let me pull that up real quick here. So obviously, budget season is upon us. Wanting to kind of get on board and have, a good starting point from a schedule. Let me pull it up so I'm not. PSPS, part of our kind of process and staff time within the budget, while I'm pulling this up, is kind of getting some key numbers for us to really kick off the budget.
Okay.
One of the big things is our PSPS number, which we just discussed. That's going to definitely drive the budget. The other big number that drives our budget is our assessed value. Historically, we've seen good assessed value numbers. Sarah did the budget, so I don't even have it. Hold on.
Search emails for me.
Oh, you sent it? Okay, tentative budget schedule. So the other big number is our assessed value, and obviously that drives our revenue. You as a board have the ability to raise and lower the tax rate within some parameters to help grow our revenue, but we also like to see the underlying values grow to help grow our revenue. So it's growth covering our increase in costs, not you as a board having to make a decision to increase the tax rate to cover our costs. We'll get those numbers the second Friday in February, is when the county assessors are required by statute to have those numbers out. And then from there, we will really know the main drivers of the budget between pension and that. Good news is out of kind of Pima County, their assessors actually really good about getting us numbers early. We've already gotten numbers from them. All of our districts down there saw a 6 to 12% increase in assessed value year over year. So not saying that correlates statewide, but it's good indication.
Good. And Gabe, does it continue to be true that this assessed valuation is from 2 years ago? Is that still accurate?
So we have a deeper conversation on this when we get into our first budget workshop. But what I can say is, so there's Prop 117 that was passed by the voters a couple of years ago. And what it did is it took us off the full cash value and put us on the limited property value. And to Director Cooperman's point, full cash value moves up and down with market conditions. Limited property is supposed to be a lagging indicator. And so what we should see is if we start seeing market conditions drop, we should see about a 2-year lag before it impacts our value. So we should kind of have that heads up based on the way the law is written. However, assessors are elected officials. So there is some of their own interpretation on some things that can be done. And we've not seen a market decline since Prop 117 was passed. Because we've also got districts and counties that the limited property value and the full cash, there's a large gap between them. And limited property still only went up, 3% in 1 year. Despite there being that gap and the fully allowed 5% growth that we could see. So it's we should have that 2-year delay. There is about an 18-month delay, 18 months to 2 year when new properties are added. Like if somebody builds a new property, it's about that much of a delay before it gets added to our tax rolls. And then the vice versa, we should see it too on the decline side. But yeah. So with that being said, the schedule's in your packet. Staff is obviously going to be working through a lot internally. We'll have some kind of rough numbers and things to discuss at the February board meeting, with really not getting into more, detailed information until kind of that March, April board meetings. And then I know we kind of discussed we've done in years past, scheduling kind of a day where we've got time set aside to kind of go more, not in this setting, but a special meeting to allow more time to go kind of line by line through budget items for board question. And that meeting's more of a board driven meeting, where the others are more of a presentation with question and answer. And that last meeting before we get to tentative adoption is that board driven. And then we'll tentatively adopt in May at the May board meeting. And then we'll ask you guys to ratify it at the June meeting.
So just so you have it in your calendars, I asked Gabe and the chief to put a date, which is the May 6th date, for that budget review, so that we would have it in our calendars and not be scrambling to get it scheduled at the last minute. So,
And something that helps me out a lot, especially with newer board members, is if something is just locking your brain up and you're like, I just don't understand this, and we can gladly capture it in the one-on-ones, so that you don't drag all that into the meeting and then I can help dissect it beforehand, and then it helps kind of steer your questions and better understanding. Because there'll be every year there's something that somebody's like, what is this thing? What that we do? And
the format is a bit different from budgets you may have seen in the past.
yes.
Anything else, Gabe?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the schedule in advance. I appreciate it. Okay. Chief Missoula?
All right, so Chief Baker is out of country recreating, and
Oh, yeah.
sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good call.
All right, thank
Nice
you, Kim.
catch, Kim.
Yes. Okay. That's what happens when you have a sleepy chair. Okay. So can I have a motion to approve the financial report and updates from Gabe Bolger?
Move to approve the financial report and updates.
I second.
Excellent. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None, it passed. Okay.
All
Now-
right, so Chief Baker's out of country recreating, and Buzz Chief Lukowski is making magic happen at the retirement home circuit today. He had an opportunity to engage with them and doing good stuff. And I wanted to park a little bit longer on Chief Coyle this month in light of current events in California and his extended involvement in the world of wildland. He's going to cover a few things and hopefully answer some questions I've been inundated by the public with, and questions you all have asked. So.
Thanks, Chief. I'm going to go into a little bit about me, not because I like to brag about myself, but because that way we're at a level playing field as to why the stuff I say later, maybe you should give it some credibility. So first off, none of this is meant to be an assessment of the response to LA fires. There's certainly a tendency to judge decisions based on their outcome. I can say from experience that when you're faced with extreme conditions, a chaotic environment, and imperfect information, you often have to choose between the least worst options. And when you choose, many times you take the other ones off the table. So if the resources, the time, the whatever you committed to that alternative you chose based on whatever reasons you had at the moment, you may not get to do any of the other ones. And so, you cannot accomplish the other stuff if your priorities if the actions you choose don't have the desired effect. That's just the reality of it. And I think it's important to Also appreciate the broader context of the situation and not just try to apply a circumstance in one area, whether it's the fuel type, the resources, anything to another area. It is certainly a context dependent environment. And that will help us determine, as more comes out of the response and everything, what lessons learned should be lessons applied in Sedona. Because not all lessons learned should be lessons applied here, because again, it's context dependent. So a little bit about me. I've been with the Sedona Fire District for 26 years. For 24 of those years, I've served on a national incident management team. I represent Arizona on the Western Fire Chiefs Wildland Fire Policy Committee. I'm a member of the IAFC's Wildland Fire Policy Committee, and I am the chair of the Arizona Fire Chiefs Wildland Committee. So I do a lot of wildland stuff, I guess you could say. I've responded to over 99 incidents, not over 99, to 99 incidents of national significance, all with the exception of 3 that have been outside of Sedona. And I've spent over 3 years deployed on those fires. I have advanced training in incident command, wildfire operations, and fire behavior. And my job is to develop the strategy on those fires. That's been my job for several years now. So when I talk about Sedona and what I see as the things that we're doing well, the things that we should, so start, stop, sustain, right? So the things that we're doing well, the things that we should keep doing, things that we should maybe stop doing. The Sedona fire environment. So we're not a Mediterranean climate like LA. We have a different fuel type. The predominant fuel type in Sedona is a juniper woodland, what it's called. And so fires in different fuel types behave differently, even under extreme situations. And so for us, the way fires tend to behave in juniper woodlands is what they call infrequent and stand replacing. That's because they need a lot of wind on them to move between the junipers. There's just not a lot of fine fuel that is in between the trees. So the embers from one tree need to be able to spot into the receptive fuels, some pack rat nest, that kind of stuff around other trees. And then they spot, the embers go to the next tree. And so that takes a sustained wind to get those junipers going and then to make that continue to move that way. But what you'll see when you look at the footprints of those fires is they look almost like a cigar. They're usually long and narrow, where the other fuel types, where things are on a slope, they'll tend to open up more like the piece of a pie as the fire continues to grow. I say that and also, so wind direction matters, right? In that scenario that I just presented. If you look at the windrows climatology, so there's these sites called RAWS sites, there's remote area weather stations, and there's 3 of them near us. One in Oak Creek Canyon, one in Dry Beaver Creek out there by the interstate on where 179 meets the interstate out there, and then other one in Verde Valley, down along the Verde River. And all 3 of those, the predominant, and I picked June because that's our, that's usually the height of our fire season. The predominant wind direction is out of the south to southwest. And all of them except Oak Creek Canyon, which is out of the south southeast. So basically that's saying is that, the wind's blowing is that southwest wind is hitting Oak Creek Canyon basically, and then it's being channeled up there. So that's why it changes a little bit. But approximately 4% of the time, well, let's pick the highest one. So the Verde Valley RAWS, 8% of the time in the daylight hours in June, the wind speeds exceed 18 or 13 miles an hour. So they're the 13 to 18 mile an hour range. So when do we get stronger winds than that? Predominantly they're outflow winds from thunderstorms. That is the area where during our fire season, we get stronger winds. That is what trapped the Granite Mountain hotshots on Yarnell. That what leads to erratic fire behavior in it. And so you talk about that long fire that's spread out in that juniper woodlands. Now you have the flank, we'll call the side of the fire. Now all of a sudden you get an outflow from a thunderstorm that is blowing at right angles to that. Now you have a massive flaming front. That can move that way as long as the winds sustain. When you're in brush and you're in the wrong spot, it can be catastrophic. that is rare. It's something that we train for, and that you watch. There's ways that stuff shows up on radar. There are ways it show up on other weather stations. There's things we can do to watch out for that. But those are the conditions when we get those kind of winds. And then, sometimes you can get 50, 60 mile an hour winds. You probably see in Phoenix where sometimes those winds will snap off power poles, that kind of things. They're short duration, they're erratic. And when the conditions are right for those, they really make us, it's something you really pay attention to when you're on the ground, because it is far less predictable than prevailing winds. That also means that our prevailing winds don't, some of this climatology goes back to, I think 92 was the earliest site for these windrows that I looked at. And so, 50, 60, 80 mile an hour winds, Santa Ana winds, phone winds, they call them. So winds that are channeled by train and that are, we don't get those. We're not subject to those. So when we do get fires in communities, how do we burn homes? They're sexy as all this sounds, there's really only two ways. It's direct flame onto the house, or it's embers into the house. It comes down to that. And so when we look at how we should protect homes, there's two different ways that we protect communities. There's two different ways that two different sources of ignition that we should address. The direct flame impingement is commonly around the perimeter of the home, or on the perimeter of the community, like where it is adjacent to the woodlands. Depending on where you're at, that can be a more obvious contiguous line, or it can be, around a certain structure and then around another structure and around another structure. If you had an area that had a lot of what they call intermix, so homes that are down one lane roads that end up in one little piece of private parcel that's surrounded by forest, then you get cherry stem, they call it, but then you'll have a lot more of that direct flame impingement around every single home. Where we have at Sedona, it is from the fires moving from the wildlands into the community. It's usually just the homes right along that perimeter. So if you have an interior road in that subdivision, then it'd be everything on the outside of that interior road. And then embers. It's fair to say that in Sedona, it would be hard to argue what the exception would be of an area that would not be prone to embers. Because that was a long way of saying that every place is prone to embers. With those southwest winds, just how small our community is and the different sources of fuel adjacent to the community, everyone could be subject to ember fallout. So we're going to talk about, before, I'm not going to get down into how we prevent it because we deal with that later, but so you look at the ways you're going to prevent that, the structure from catching on fire from direct flame impingement, or the structure catching on fire from embers. And when you think about that, especially with the changing fire environment, and call it what you will, I was just on a fire that started in December and went into January. That's never happened before in Arizona. And right now, the energy release component, so the way we measure the dryness of the fuels and susceptibility to burn, on the numbers that just came out today, was almost to the 90th percentile. It was twofold higher than it normally is this time of year. So so there's two different things I think that should inform our future actions. One is that the physics at the home ignition level have not changed. So the area, the 30 feet around your home, what you need to do to protect that, about the embers, everything else, that is the same. The frequency of the right combinations of conditions to contribute to extreme fire behavioral is going to occur more often. If you stay at the 90th percentile of dryness for longer than you're just that one variable, now all the variability in winds and everything else, you're more likely to have that stuff line up. And when we're looking at what we should do in the future, I think that's the thing we should prepare for. So we talk sustain. So what are the things we should sustain? Ensure that our codes align with science. Now, what that means is that, so especially like our WUI code is one of them that I think is a good example. If there's a standard that says that, hey, you should remove all flammable vegetation within 5 feet of your home. Well, man, I don't know if people like 5 feet. Let's go 4 feet. we can adjust the code. But there's a lot of work, a lot of science that went into that. And I can tell you that the insurance companies are only interested in the actions that are backed by science. I mean, they have IBHS, they have their own little basically group that they support that does all these kinds of experiments. And if we're going to do something and then adjust from the code, we may as well just not even use it. So that's the one thing we should ensure, and then use the code, enforce the code, and inspect to the code. Something we do right now.
The code is 5 feet now?
I actually don't know exactly what the code is, but
I believe it's 5.
it-
Then there's a 10 and 20 and 30-foot recommendation, but
Yeah.
the full clearance, I believe, is 5 foot.
that's,
And is that the trunk of the tree being 5 feet away with all the branches touching the roof?
So Best way I explain it is the days of old where you have the manicured hedgerow that is up against the front of the wall of the house, that should not be. Have some nice gravel and maybe some decorative flowers.
yeah, there's different approaches to how you look at that home ignition zone, whether you say, all right, I'm going to incorporate the tree. The way we used to be back in the day when we first started, we say, we'll just include the tree as part of the home, and then we'll look at 5 feet beyond that. Except, you wouldn't have a flammable roof. And now you kind of have a flammable roof. So I don't want to get between you and your tree. That's for a different time, but yeah, there could be consequences. And so we need to ensure that we have good coordination. And one of the things you may have seen on the news is Chief Brian Fennessy from Orange County Fire Authority talking about en masse. So there's an effort before to create a national mutual aid system that allowed for a more effective coordinated response when there's these large incidents where you need to pull from a very big area. And it's something that the IFC is advocating that we improve. Because right now we don't have a good congruent system to move stuff around. And that needs to improve. And the coordination also talked about the local level with our initial attack plans that we have with the Forest Service, our coordination with law enforcement for evacuation, our coordination with county EM, which is more of a recovery thing, but making sure that they're in the right spot. A lot of time coordination too means that the elected officials understand what their role is and isn't. And so if we stand up an emergency operations center and there's elected officials in there that are there to manage to allocate monies for certain things, that kind of stuff, that they're not at the incident command post trying to dictate tactics. So there's a little bit of that.
Well, and to that point, it's not a set it and forget it. Okay, here's our plan. We're ready to go, because we're still figuring out what the federal resources are going to look like this year because of some changes they've made to the Forest Service. And if we have a neighboring fire district that has some budgetary restrictions, and as we do right now, they're not staffing to the same level we're used to, so that the truck that shows up might have 2 people on it or might be browned out that day. So it's a constant effort. It's not a come up with a plan and then check on it every once in a while.
Yeah, that was, and the IFC on our wildfire position statement, one of the things was properly pay wildland firefighters, pay them a living wage, because the system is dependent upon them contributing, like the federal land management agencies contributing resources. And the situation right now is not supporting that outcome. And it's getting worse and worse every year. One of the other things that's an impact is that these incident management teams, it's a voluntary thing, and you have to get your boss to say it's okay to go. And when you're in fire specific jobs and you have the ability to talk about this, like learn all that experience, come back and apply it at your home unit, that kind of thing, that's great. But when you work in budget and finance and we need to pull you away as a finance section chief, and now there's budget cuts and there's fewer people working in your office, local rationality, if you're that person's boss, is to don't let them go, which I get it. And then all of a sudden you have fewer incident management teams, which we do, and we have 3 fewer this year. And there is not a good plan to fix that. So, time will tell on that one, but going back to Sedona, the rest of it is to ensure that we're trained, equipped, and proficient in wildland fire response. One question when Chief Baker's back, I want to get with him, is like, so there's task books that you complete when you qualify in a wildland fire position. So it doesn't, just like, matter of fact, it's what we modeled our task books on when somebody qualifies to be like, act as an engineer or act as a captain. And their tasks. But then in our system, in the system way it is, you're done. When you do that a lot, you get the experience and to stay fresh. But when you do the task books and then you're back in Sedona and you don't do wildland fire, and you maybe choose not to go out, and then you're expected to participate effectively in response, you may be less able to do that. And I can tell you that we have 20 hours of training every month that we have to do for all of our standards that relate to structural firefighting. And one thing I want to talk to you big about, nobody does this because I asked at a couple of these meetings, but is there a competency standard we should have for wildland specific stuff that we look at, how we make sure that people maintain currency? We have an annual refresher, but it's just once a year, and it just looks different when you look at how careful we are about making sure people are ready for wildland fire, or what we have to do with our sets and reps that we get in EMS. So I don't know, I think that's probably something that we should look at. And then we should also educate and support the community in its efforts to improve home survivability. And so, that's the one that's like, hey, I can tell you that we're not going to save the day. The Sedona Fire District is not going to be able to respond with enough resources under the wrong conditions to make up for the work that people didn't do around their homes. It's just not going to happen. It's not possible. But there's a lot we can do to help educate people so they understand why doing that work around their home is important, and what the right work is. I think that's, well, I'll just stop right there for that. And so tools, how we do that. So we have our Firewise Communities USA, grassroots effort, how things can happen on a small scale. Great program. It starts that education piece. Communities that want to do that, then they're coming together, and it demonstrates effort, right? Because they have to put so many hours in every year to get to get renewed, and it invites a coordination among that community because everybody goes in together, and then they have their board, they have all that kind of stuff. That's awesome. Ready, set, go to the IFC. There's something else. Anybody, if you guys have questions anytime in the middle of this, please.
I'm not sure it's a question as much as a comment for you.
Sure.
When you look at Sedona, and if you look at Uptown, you look at the village of Oak Creek, everything you say about Firewise fits. But there's a lot in this district that doesn't fit into that. And living example. And what you find is when you try to do Firewise, in those people who are adjacent to the Forest Service, then Firewise, there's no upside to them other than, yes, it's an upside in terms of your house may survive. But for anyone else, there's an upside in terms of insurance, in terms of things like that. There's none of that. So I would like to suggest that along the way, you find a way to get Firewise outside of HOAs.
Oh, it's like a plant.
I know.
It's like I planted her here for this.
And
All
thank
right.
you for the lead in.
Yes, that's a wonderful idea. And so let's just go there. So yeah, Firewise has always been this kind of grassroots thing, always takes care of small scale. So 15 years ago, Michelle Steinberg at that time was in charge of the Firewise Communities USA program. I'm like, Michelle, we need something that can be applied across jurisdiction, that has more horsepower, that is more robust. And that was before the reason wildfire insurance were never used in the same sentence very often is relative to the other risks that they faced, their loss was small. There was this home hardened standard for going above codes for wind protection 10, 15 years ago in areas that were prone to hurricanes. So, but there's never anything for wildfires, and because we didn't burn enough homes, we didn't create enough of an impact of them to address the situation. We have now, and I can tell you that the way you don't address it is try to separate risk from the pricing of risk and tell the insurance companies they're going to do something. California made that shot. And they said, if you do this, you have to stay. And 3 of the largest insurance providers pulled out of their whole market. That made more sense to them from a fiscal standpoint. So we are with a gentleman by the name of Frank Freibold that is working with us at the Arizona Fire Chiefs Association to help us have the right kind of conversations with insurance. But back to your point, so Michelle Steinberg now is the director of the wildfire division of the NFPA. And I was on a Zoom call with her this afternoon. By the way, she said she wanted me to tell you all thank you for paying attention to this and for the support and everything that Sedona Fire District Board's elected officials have had for us preparing our community for wildfire, from the codes adoptions to the equipment and everything else. She said, make sure and tell them thank you, Jason. I said, I will. And so anyways, the NFPA and the I forgot the acronym, IBHS, which is the nonprofit group supported by the insurance company. Brian, right, tell me what it stands for. Maybe. So they began in California with something called the Wildfire Prepared Home Standard. And now they're looking at, there's hopefully within the next 6 months, there's going to be some pilots in California and in Oregon on a wildfire prepared community or neighborhood standard. And Helen, to your point, that's the intent, is to get something that on a community level you can do that is backed by science that will reduce the risk to the homes and also increase their insurability.
Define what you mean by community level.
Neighborhood level, or the example that she gave was that was 100 homes, but I'm not saying that you can't be more sparse than that. I haven't seen the standard yet, but right now the minimal requirements to do this, I'll explain how it works, and then you'll see why it's not necessarily size dependent. So 90% of the structures need to have Class A roofs. So that'd be one of the things. So that means that they have to have roofs that are made out of non-combustible materials. If you have a bunch of shake shingle roofs that aren't pressure treated, then that wouldn't work. And there has to be 10-foot clearance from other structures. And that's because, Marshall, Lahana, probably when we see things about LA, there's certain, when you burn down the target in the middle of town on the Marshall fire, that's not a wildfire. That's enough wind pushing heat from this building to this building, all the way to get in the middle of town, or maybe embers. But, and so that's a bad situation, because no matter how the home starts, there's huge potential for those to spread to multiple different homes. And then the other one was, you talked about some, a standard for evacuation was one of the things that was considered, or perhaps a fire-wise, communities thing, something else. But those two things were one of the ones that are pretty anchored into, just because those are the two big things that make a difference. So anyways, once under this plan, what happens is that you define that area that is the neighborhood. And then they look at it, the code people, the people that do the fire modeling, they say, all right, if you take that circle, say it's a circle, you cut it to slices. On the outside of on the big part, the crust, if you will, of the pie, those areas may be the homes that have to worry about direct flame impingement and embers. And so it's about 13 things that they would have to do to meet the criteria for that home. Some may require retrofitting, most don't. And then if you're just in the ember area, there'd be 10 things you have to do. And so that is the way that system would look. And then it's done the criteria is developed in cooperation with a group that is basically largely represented by the insurance companies. It's done to a standard that is defensible as science, and it has the brand recognition and the standards recognition that comes along with the NFPA. And I mean, it doesn't probably sound like a very sexy thing to get excited about, but I'm excited about that, because it shows a way to, lots of times folks, they just need to know how to get where they need to be, how to do it in a reasonable way. And I think that has potential. We'll see what it looks like when it comes all the way out, but it has potential for scaling it up enough to make a bigger difference in Sedona and in other communities like Sedona.
Well, let me just say in response to
Please.
that, I mean, I think it's wonderful. And I think we need to do whatever we need to do.
Mhm.
But I also think it's really important that whatever comes out can be scaled down to the individual homeowner. Because Sedona is a community of independent people. We all know that. And some live in close communities, and some, like I'm looking at Scott and I, live out in the way. We live at the end of that cherry
stem? Yeah.
cherry stem, okay, right next to the
I don't-
Forest
yep.
Service. All right, so something that I can do, but that I don't have to involve the gentleman who owns 3 acres in front of me, who has trucks and this and that and the other piled all over his lot, is what I can do. So I think if we can do something that individuals feel they can do for themselves, and yes, let's by all means get communities together, but let's also empower individuals who are out in the way, who are probably somewhat higher risk.
So the 30 feet around your home matters most. I mean, that's the science, the home ignition zone is called that for a reason. And so, yeah, when it comes to increasing the survivability of your home, what happens within that 30 feet is most important. And when we talk about these, how you take care of things at either groups of homes or neighborhoods, or, you know, however far you want to zoom out, when you want to get the attention of the insured companies to be less likely to just broad brush everything as a high risk area, then you need to, those clusters help. Let's put it that way. There's multiple different ways looking to have people get recognition for individual actions, but it's, you know, those large companies, they aggregate as much as they can when it comes to the risk and the numbers. It's because it just makes sense to them. So I think that's what you said is important, though, to make sure people understand, hey, no matter if this makes a difference in your insurability or not, these are the things you can do to protect, to help your home survive. And if you guys do these at whatever scale is determined that is necessary to have an effect, then that's what we can do to help reduce the likelihood that your insurance will be canceled. And they're similar but different. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So I'll just close with this, is that if I say this is unimaginable or unthinkable, or if something happens and none of these are black swans. None of this has happened. These are the right combination of conditions that if you took those conditions and said, hey, here's the conditions that are occurring, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to be a bad day. So the reason I say that is when politicians, and especially on the media, you see, I didn't see this coming, it's unimaginable. So come on, it's not. Some things you can't prevent, but that's different than saying that it's unimaginable, because this is all, if I'm wrong, Scott, this is within the realm of things you think about, because the Naha and everything else, how is that? I mean, they killed firefighters in that same area 40, 50 years ago. And it's not unimaginable. So that's what I wanted to share with y'all for.
Thank you. I do have a question in sharing with us that we're at the 90th percentile of dryness now. Do you have any data on what's happening in February and March? Is there any hope to reduce that percentile?
So the climatology, there's supposed to, I mean, without getting too nerdy on this, so I'll get kind of nerdy because I can't help myself, right? But so the high pressure that's been sitting off the coast of California that has been causing the Santa Ana winds is forecasted to move further out by like Saturday or Sunday. And what's happened to us is that where it's at right now, the stuff that comes around it, the systems that come around it, give us nothing but the wind. So we're caught in a pressure gradient, but we're not getting the moisture. At my house, the dew point was -30 yesterday. That is crazy dry. And so if that moves over, then that will allow some more moisture. That's what's supposed to happen. Moderate moisture, maybe right now they're talking about 2 or 3 inches of Flagstaff snow from Monday to Tuesday.
Really?
So yeah, so a minimal, that won't make a difference. When you look at the soil moisture and so the background of that is the drought index. And then you look at what we have coming. We are going to enter this summer dry. We're going to get in extreme fire conditions quicker. The green up in the brush, so the live brush, when it goes to its green up, as it takes on moisture and grows in the spring, it becomes less receptive to burn. That period of time will be shorter. And so we will spend a lot of time, we'll spend a longer amount of time than we do in a normal year if conditions stay as they, with the La Nina year, like they're saying they are likely to, than we would on a normal season. I guess the bright spot I can give you is that if you look at a scatter diagram between below normal precipitation in the winter, late winter, early spring, and it is positively correlated with stronger monsoons. And that the belief is that when the soil's dry, it heats up quicker because there's not the moisture to sink in it. And so that helps us to establish that four corners high more quickly and get a stronger monsoon that has an earlier onset. So that's kind of where I'm at. I don't expect I'm going to have to plug in my heat tape on my roof this year. And I'm hopeful that there'll be an early monsoon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there other questions for Chief Coyle?
Diane, anything that seemed wrong-headed from where you come from?
No, it seems absolutely right on target.
Deal.
I mean, I don't think I think these are such extraordinary events that we're having in California that, and in the West, that we can't just act as though we're going to be protected by a department. And, I think everybody has to be part of the solution. I think you're right perfectly on target there.
So I've had the unfortunate opportunity, I've met a lot of new community members in the past 10 days. But with that, it's kind of one of the analogies I anchor into is while they appreciate the efforts of our fire district, they still have a fire extinguisher in their kitchen. And so, they're still making efforts to make sure they're helping defend their space. So, and that's kind of the message with this, with the wildfire work we're doing is like, hey, you still need to trim some stuff. You still need to you make sure you have proper building materials. You still have to do these things if you want it to have the best chance to skirt this.
And do we have sufficient information packets for neighbors and
We do it,
residents?
and I'll talk about that in my report in more detail.
Okay.
I did ask Michelle to send me any information she has about where the gaps in knowledge are that they've seen as the NFPA has been looking at their stuff. There were things where you think people know what they should know, and then you find out later on they don't. She's finding stuff on. I'm sure you get a Chief Lewis and get out to them. Yeah. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Kurt.
Good afternoon. Just to tag on a little bit, we do get phone calls about once a week, maybe twice a week. People want their homes assessed, and we do go out and do Firewise type assessment of their homes and give them recommendations, 5, 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet, the limbing and the cleaning up. And for most of them, they are pretty receptive of that. I've had a couple where they've said the insurance company said that they have to have 10 feet of nothing between away from the house. And that's not a bad thing, although it's not pretty. But we are out there. We're pretty proactive with that. And sometimes it's 1 a week, sometimes 2, 3, 4 a week. And the HOAs are starting to contact us back again. So we are staying on top of that, especially now. Gonna ramp up even more. Moving along with that. So December wasn't super busy because of the holidays and people off, and most of the contractors took a couple of weeks off. So I anticipate January to pick up the slack from that. Those two numbers, two up there that I believe you wanted December of last year's numbers and this year's, this last December. So they don't kind of line up against each other, but they're there. So we're pretty much close on both from a year ago. We have a few more life safety systems than we did before. 2,048 now that are out there, and those are fire sprinklers, fire alarms, and hood systems. Those are all things that are tracked, be compliant. Right now, we're at 91% compliance with that, and we've done 3 code consultations because it's been a slow year, but next month's gonna sure. We got 26 plan reviews in the books, and we got out and did 31 inspections, which would be wildland interface, firewise, your tenant occupancy, tenant improvement inspections, and then any other random thing that comes up. And when those inspections, like when you get into an HOA and they want to do a firewise thing, you're in it 2, 3, 4 hours. Good. You might as well plan at least most of the day just to do that. So with those going on, moving on. Notable events. Let me go back real quick to that. Sorry. So some notable events. Last month, you had the Toys for Tots starting off with Stuff the Bus, which was Toys for Tots. All the toys are rounded up. They put them in the city buses, and our engine crews escorted them up to Posse Grounds, where PD was big involved with this, and they gave out toys. The families that were signed up, they came and received their toys for Toys for Tots. So that was a good event. It went really well. That was on the 10th. On the 14th, we had the bike rodeo, which is Toys for Tots also. They do that every year, and we participate with that every year to help out. We'll set up a bike course for them and have the engine crews come out, and it's fun. It's a rodeo because those kids are all over the place. So this year they handed out 47 bikes to kids that needed bikes. That was good. And the same ones can't come back the following year, so they got to wait a year. So I have a feeling this year is going to probably double as the last year. But that went really well. Had a good time. Thank you, Station 4 crew, for coming out and spending a few hours with us, helping those kids on their bicycles. So, all right, since it's winter time and half of the home heating fires reported during the months of December, January, February, you could probably in our area make that November and add March to that too, because we will have cold weather. So keeping things that burn away 3 feet from the heat sources. So you don't want it, obviously, next to a bed. That was a bad idea. Don't use your oven to heat your home. That produces CO, especially if it's a gas one. It will be if it's gas. Not a good thing. Chimneys clean, inspected every year, qualified professional, absolutely. We get calls a lot on these where people have not cleaned their chimneys. They don't even know how long it's been since they cleaned their chimneys. I do have a wood stove, and I'm up once a week, check my cap, and I sweep it every year just to be sure. And it's not that bad. Just do it yearly. In good shape. Turn off portable heaters leaving the room, especially when you're going to bed. And you don't have CO monitors or alarms installed in your home, and you do have gas-fired appliances, highly recommend you do so. Outside of every living quarter, so outside of your bedrooms and the hallways, common hallways, should be smoke and carbon monoxide at a minimum, and smokes inside the bedrooms. Unless you have a gas fireplace in your bedroom, then you want to have the CO protection there also. I think that's yes.
Talk about the chimneys. You're talking also about chimneys for gas fireplaces or for just the,
It's not a bad idea to have them inspected, but your wood-fired ones for sure. Solid fuels most definitely. Just to make sure that the gas is working right, you don't have a CO problem gonna begin with that. It's always good to have them checked, just like your heater being serviced.
Thank you.
Buzz.
Oh, that's pretty slow.
Oh, no, no special name?
A little house.
I'm tired. I can't think of it.
Little house.
So thanks for your patience and excusing my tardiness. We were meeting with the Haven nursing director, which is the long-term and rehab facility out in the village. So for one of our partners. So I'd forgotten that the board meeting times changed, so scheduled it for 2. So free pass once, I guess, right? Let's see, just a couple notable things. We finally have our fleet mechanic, Reese Tarver, started.
I met him.
Did you? Okay, cool. I was hoping. Yeah, so Mike is head over heels in love with the concept and with Reese too, because he's a good guy. They're working on all things fleet, and this week they've been finalizing those 2 new engines with Paul Chabot, one of our firefighters, and then one of our engineers, Andrew Johnson, getting those in service. We're waiting on a couple things from the service company to fix a couple things that are their issue. But once those are done, they're going to be put into service. It's taken longer than we wanted, but it's worth doing it well so that we don't put something out that having to pull out of service. So you're doing an in-service with all the engineers and all the firefighters, teaching them the idiosyncrasies with that new vehicle, with the pump, some differences with the pump, the foam system, things like that. They're starting that on Friday in conjunction with Mike, the mechanic too. So the other fleet thing is we got our ambulance down from Washington, the remount. So that's a re-chassis. It's a 4-wheel drive chassis that has pretty much the old box gets put back on with some refurbishment and improvements. So it has LED lights all around. Anything that's improved in like an ambulance standard, like a forward trajectory standard that makes it safer, those things get added to it. Like the dreaded seat belts that we've been mandated throughout from the state, unfunded mandate. But these harnesses are like race car harnesses, but I could stand up and work with the patient and it'll still like sit me down if I have to, which we don't want to test that. But all the positions have these big robust harnesses now for the medics, which is great. I'm sure they're going to wear them all the time. It's on the record. Let's see. It also has a UV light system in it it puts a cone of UV for any surface contaminants, which is a new thing that Chief Mazulis let us try. Very hard to check the efficacy of that, but it is an add-on that we added to that older box. It also has a different filtering system within the existing HVAC for that back part. They put a new filter that would be more of a contemporary thing, sort of on the heels of pandemic stuff. So
And
it's got some great improvements.
Post-COVID, there was a lot of fly-by-night, portable UV, all this technology that's going to save the world. And now that we're 5 years post-COVID and they have some integrative strategies, it basically doesn't bake, but it neutralizes all the surface contaminants when the crews aren't in there. And we'll have to do a little training on don't go in there when it's on.
Yeah, it recirculates the air and then you shut the door and set a timer. If you were to open that door and enter, it turns off because it's a significant amount of UV light. So, and that does work. We tested that when we were in the factory. Let's see. Continued with some peer team training with our mental health oversight, start moving on. Training the team. Actually had dispatcher was involved with that. So we're expanding kind of the umbrella of our team for peer support. And then Corey will be going to a conference. I'll be down there too next week in Mesa. It's about firefighter wellness and mental health. So that'll be great. And so is one of our captains, Greg Eberline. He'll be down there too. Let's see. Normal EMS training, CPR. advanced cardiac life support for our folks. That's just standard fare. Working with the alarm room, trying to, some of that stuff goes one step forward and two steps back sometimes when you have so many partner agencies. But we are the trajectory of all of us working together Verde Valley wide under the same response plans and things is really moving forward in a good way. It's just, that's a lot of work and a lot of meetings and things. So working with them on that. I don't know anything else with the grander alarm room from your end.
Getting ready to enter into contract.
Yeah, a
talks.
new contract will be
Yeah.
shortly there. The manager there is working a console at night right now. And so that's kind of put because of some staffing things going on internally there, which takes her administrative weight away a little bit. So kind of waiting for that to subside.
We might be doing negotiation meetings with the city at 10 o'clock at
At
night,
night,
but we'll
yeah.
figure it out.
And then, and then pre-hospital wise, as far as EMS, working with Northern Arizona Healthcare to actually learn really their processes of how they do interfacility transfers, things that are happening when we transfer a patient into the emergency department. Sometimes that can get clunky if you just rely on the same people doing the same thing the right way over and over. So we kind of backed up the truck with some new doctors groups that are coming in and some open avenues really with the new COO with Northern Arizona Healthcare. And then his folks have really opened the doors to be like, Sedona Fire, help us, let us help you. Can we have your data to show where we're doing well and where we can work together and improve together? And I'll tell you what, those relationships, and I wasn't in this position before, Chief Mazulis was, but I don't think they've been as open as they are now. Like we're on the same team right now, working with them, very transparent, a lot of understanding that they have reputation repair and trust to build with the community. And they say those things in these meetings, and they're letting us chime in and explain our role in that too, because we are on that continuum of care with them for our citizens. So,
And no, never in our history have we had the opportunity to see behind the curtain. And in fact, the CEO is, I stagger quarterly meetings with the CEO and the CEO, and they've never been more transparent, and they've never appreciated or recognized the fact that we're a partner in healthcare, not just they really appreciate the inputs, and they've daylighted some internal things that they're working through, whereas before they'd be, don't look over here, everything's fine. And so they're owning it, and it's a really good moment in time right now. So I'm excited.
that's it for me. It's kind of a maintenance month post Christmas a little bit, you know.
I'll do Jordan. So, well, that's really small. So we got back on, the bulk of the month was getting back on track. Jordan worked with a couple of our folks and spent a week at the training center, just doing some general maintenance and getting it prepared for a live fire exercise. And we got all of our crews through. It's first time in history we've gotten everybody through in a cycle. It was great. We got all our OSHA mandated trainings complete. Certified one more person to be eligible for the captain's test, which I put the potential for almost 9 if everybody submits. And that's in our world and our sized organization, having 9 individuals prepared and ready to test for a captain's position that's huge. That's good. That, you know, because we have an unwritten rule of a minimum of 3 to put on a test just for the competitive piece, and to have potentially 9 interested, it speaks to a lot of the succession planning work we've been doing in the past couple of years, and it's working. So that's exciting. We did our driver's training. Next week we're doing our extrication training. Coming, and then I wish Jordan was here because he's so sad because he's just onboarded folks, and then now we're 6-month testing the folks we onboarded before, and then preparing for an academy in April for the next 3. So the cycle continues. And then we've been meeting Chief Coyle and Buzz and Jordan and I, and meeting with Kiona to develop the CAPS test. And that's been a bulk of our time this month because it's not just, put together a written test and a couple scenarios. We have these evolutions where we try to make it, it's a controlled environment. We try to introduce stress to rate and score their reaction. And that takes role players, and we generally like to have internal and external role players. So you get see outside yourself and get a better picture. And so just coordinating all those resources to be there for the test has been a challenge, but I think we're well prepared for it. And then really one of the things he's doing is working with some injury tracking. We're looking at some different ways to correlate how we train, how we do our physical fitness, and how it ties to works compensation injuries. And so kind of playing with some data on that and adding some new software resources to kind of see what we can do with that this coming year. So he's been a runner around. I'm glad he's taking a break this week. Just hope he doesn't get arrested. No, he's doing nothing illegal, but he's in a country that has a lot stricter rules than us.
Do they?
Yeah, well, for Americans.
It's his hope that none of us get arrested, for the record. It's not specific to Jack.
But before I get into the numbers, to tag on to Chief Coyle's presentation, I've had a lot of interest from the public this past week about the wildfire preparedness and the what. And so working with the city, they're taking charge of setting up the meeting, and then we're going to fill it with content. At least our piece and our message is really going to be so far what and how the Sedona Fire District works internally, and then how we work with our auto and mutual aid partners. And then we're going to have a heavy focus with our piece of the presentation on what Chief Coyle talked about with Firewise and being prepared, and the onus is on the homeowner as well. And we're going to have the water companies there to talk about infrastructure, the power company, and then the city's going to have their piece. And we anticipate the meeting to be latter part of February, early part of March, and it's tentatively planned to be because of the expected audience at the Performing Arts Center at the high school. So I'm hoping, speaking with them today, I'm hoping to have some dates for you all early next week so we can get it in the calendar. But as you can imagine, like speaking with the city, she's like, well, we got Arizona Water. I said, well, there's 20 plus water districts in the fire district. So the people from the village, the impact of Arizona Water's delivery won't be as impactful. They need Big Park, and then we've got Pine Valley, and we've got Oak Creek Water, and we've got so many different systems in place that it's a lot of folks that come from a municipality or it's part of the city, it's city water, and we don't have that, and I don't think we ever will, because the systems are so different, and the age and how they manage it, and they're not all interconnected, so it's a lot more complex here as far as water supply goes. And we're going to try to deliver a message that, because that's what a lot of the stuff with LA they're anchoring into is the water supply. So we're going to try to really get that information out to our public, and some of the answers won't be fun to hear, but it's fact. And so any questions on that meeting, and I'll reach out to y'all next week with the dates. And if you're getting feedback from residents about a topic we should cover as the fire district, please let me know, and then I'll solicit that next week. But we will be clear that we don't control the water systems, nor can we mandate that companies put in more pipes or hydrants or things like that. It's outside of our wheelhouse. So, and then the city's statutorily, the law enforcement officers have the evacuation, mandates. We can't make anybody evacuate. And so we're going to try to cover all that and more, so that get our public. I'm glad that people are interested in learning about it. And I really I'm hoping our message lands, that Sedona is different, you know, and Chief Cole touched on it, the vegetation type, the weather patterns, and there, but we can still have catastrophic wildfire if things align. So,
Chief, you and I've had this conversation, but I know that, I mean, I'm delighted, I think it's appropriate within the confines of the city of Sedona for Sedona to be, and the Sedona Police Department to be responsible for evacuation. But the district is so much bigger than that.
Yeah.
And who's responsible for evacuation planning? Who's responsible for all of that for the rest?
the respective counties, and we're gonna talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
because yeah, it's the Yavapai County Sheriff or Coconino County Sheriff.
In Arizona's constitution, so it's not like we could change that, but we get them to the table.
Yeah.
And actually, we did a good job
Yeah.
with building the evacuation plan. They were all at the table when we did at the city of Sedona, when we did the evacuation planning for the entire district. They were all at the meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll talk offline.
Yeah.
But then we got to layer communication, you know, dead zones and this and this and this and different channels and the access of each law enforcement agency to each other's channels. And there's a lot to it. But yeah, as Chief Coyle said, it's constitutionally, we can't do it. We can't mandate it.
Will the respective supervisors that represent our districts also be?
That is our hope, and that is why it's, you know, people wanted the meeting next week and just coordinating all so we can maximize the event and have the opportunities for the electeds to be there, the utilities, the city, the county, us. You know, but that's what's taken a little longer, is coordinating the layers of people that we think should be in the room. So, but you can see the incident summaries year over year. My eyes are getting blurry.
Actually, I can read that.
Readers.
Which is weird.
Yeah, little ended the year, a few hundred calls under last year. It's what it is. It's just, we don't produce widgets, so we can't control volume, and we just respond to what we're called to do. And
It's pretty funny.
and it's, well, a lot of people say, well, how come there's a variation? We don't know. Less people crashed, less people got sick. You know, it's just, it's what we do, but it's still within the realm of, if we saw a 2,000 call drop, then we might want to evaluate how we're, you know, spreading out our resources, or look if there's an area of town that's suddenly has an uptick. But the call volume staying steady at all our stations and representative of how and why we put our resources where we do. Next slide. And you can see the Still District, and I'm explaining. So total responses obviously is how many times they go out the door, and then number of calls in their Still District is how many calls are in their area. So, and I could further break this down if anybody wanted to see, but essentially, so Station 1 has 183 calls, 100, you know, so what is that? About 30. Little under 30 were out of their district, and that could just be that's most likely the ambulance going to help out in Station 4's area or somewhere else. But that's what creates that difference in numbers.
So that is apparatus response, right?
Yeah.
Because if 155 divided by 30, that would be 50 calls a day.
Yeah, 150.
155 by 30 would be 5 calls a day.
5 calls a day.
Yeah.
I added a 0 there somehow.
Yeah.
So that is calls then. So,
Yeah. I was like, wait, what?
So like 23 divided by less than 1 call a day.
And then but then like Station 5 is a single apparatus, so that's true to State Engine 51's number, whereas Station 1 is an ambulance and an engine, so that, you know, we don't break out how many of those are ambulances and how many of those are engine calls. But as you can see, month over month, year over year, for a decade, Station 1 and 3 win the prize.
And sometimes Station 3 wins.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. Without interfacility.
And in our times, year over year, again, with this, you know, a couple seconds on dispatch time, And then turnout time is gone down about 5-6 seconds. So that's good. Like I've always said, response time, that's an aggregate. It just depends on where the call is. If all the calls are across the street this month, then the response times drop. But it's just that's still a good number. And then I don't know how the ambulance times have gone down, but that's still only a few minutes. But we're watching it. Like Buzz alluded to, that the current topic of conversation is interfacilities and how increases to SEC's patient population may impact our service delivery. And some of you attended the legislative stuff last week and learned that there's quite a few bills racing up the chain about how all that works. And as stated, if some of those are written into law, I don't think there's going to be a huge impact here, because as a representative example, Timber Mesa Fire, which is over in the White Mountains, they do 2.68 interfacility transports to Phoenix a day, and their turnaround time is 9 hours. And us, it's about 5 hours, and we do 8 per month. So my point is I don't believe that our market share would draw a private company up here for 8 calls a month. It's just not. So while we keep our eyes on it, I'm not concerned about the impact to our district budget right now. Timber Mesa has some greater concerns, because at 3 a day, that's a substantial number. That's revenue. So we're going to keep our eyes on it, see how it manifests. And then purchase orders over 10,000. The only surprise was Zebrascapes, and that was due to our insurance company saying that Station 6 was not safe and needed to have some trees trimmed. So that was an unexpected expense. But it is now, if you drive by Station 6, it looks phenomenal. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the general idea of Station 6 having this gorgeous natural scape and not guided towards a fire-wise natural scape is caught up with us after a decade, and it needed some work, because like our crew spent a week last year and filled 2 dumpsters, and you couldn't tell they trimmed anything. I'm talking roll away 40-yard dumpsters, so it just got beyond our crew's capacity. And while 20 years ago, we may have had some folks that are more used to owning a home and trimming their landscaping, a lot of our new hires are not trained in appropriately landscaping. And so we wanted to make sure the stuff lived that state. So.
Oh, good.
And then a thank you card. This is very nice. And then now we kick everybody out.